Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's video. As you can see here on the screen, the topic that we're going to be talking about today is characterization. A couple things to think about before we get started here. As the directions say on the screen, you are going to follow some different directions on different slides. Most of these slides are notes, but there also are some questions built in along the way. So since you know that information up front, you know that it is super important to make sure you are paying attention and following along, because yes, this is going to be going in the grade book. So make sure you are taking really solid notes and make sure you are paying close attention so that you do well on this assignment. Also, like I've already mentioned, you are going to be taking notes today. You are going to take notes over everything that you see that is highlighted in the color yellow, so make sure you're paying attention to that. And again, you are going to have some questions to answer, and you'll be able to refer back to your notes as you're answering those questions. So definitely in your best interest to make sure you are following along, paying attention, and getting these notes copied down into your language arts notebook. So if you need to, you can pause the video to get your supplies ready, or if you're ready to go, we're going to go ahead and get started. When it comes to characterization, what we're talking about are different terms that can be used to describe characters within a story. We have about 6 or 8 terms that we're going to be going over today, and we're also going to be looking at different examples for each one. The first term that we're going to focus on is the protagonist. The protagonist, if we're talking about a story, is the character who the story is mostly about. In general, when we think about the protagonist, we are referring to what most people would call the quote-unquote good guy in the story, but we're going to talk more about that here in just a few minutes. An example of a protagonist that you're probably really familiar with is Harry Potter from the Harry Potter series. If we look at our definition, we can tell that the story is most certainly mostly about him, right? The books and the movies are named after him, so that's a good indication that the stories are mostly about him. And he is considered the good guy in the story. He's the one that we're rooting for. This would be a great place to remind you that there are some things highlighted in the color yellow, and you are expected to get those copied into your language arts notebook. If you didn't have enough time while I was explaining this vocabulary term to get all of this copied down, make sure that you pause the video and get all of those notes copied before you move on. Here are some other examples of protagonists that you might be familiar with. We have Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Again, the story is mostly about her. She's the one that we're rooting for. She's the good guy. We have Lilo and Stitch. We have Sully and Mike from Monsters, Inc. And we have Woody and Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story. Again, our protagonist is the quote-unquote good guy. It's the person that we're rooting for in the story, and it's who the story is mostly about. Now, one thing I want to point out about protagonist is just because they are the good guy, that does not mean that they always make good decisions. Let's take Stitch up here at the top, for example. If you have seen Lilo and Stitch, you know that Stitch is like constantly causing chaos. Things tend to get broken, things tend to get messed up when he's involved, but we're still rooting for him in the story. So even though he doesn't always make the best choices, he is still the protagonist. So even though we refer to the protagonist as the good guy, I just want you to remember that that doesn't always mean they make the best choices. Our next vocabulary term that we're going to talk about here is antagonist. Antagonist is the opposite of the protagonist. The antagonist is the person or the thing in the story that goes against the protagonist. It's kind of like the force that is fighting against the protagonist. Often we refer to our antagonist as the bad guy. And our example, since we used Harry Potter for our protagonist, we're going to use Voldemort as our antagonist. You do have some things highlighted in yellow, so please make sure that you get those things copied down before moving on. Feel free to pause the video if you need to. Here are some other examples of antagonists that you might be familiar with. We have Ursula from The Little Mermaid, Jafar from Aladdin, Scar from The Lion King, and we have Mother Gothel from Rapunzel. Remember, when we're thinking about the antagonist, it's the force that is fighting against the protagonist. very often the bad guy. There is lots of bad energy on the screen, so hopefully that will help you remember that the protagonist is the good guy and the antagonist is the bad guy. All right, we have a couple of practice questions to answer here. This would be one of those times where you might want to refer back to those notes that you just copied into your language arts notebook. Question number 1 says, the evil queen in Snow White is jealous of Snow White's beauty and tries to destroy her. What sort of character is the evil queen? Is she the protagonist or is she the antagonist? Hopefully you identified that the evil queen is B, the antagonist of the story. Remember, the antagonist is the bad guy. It's the one that is in conflict with the good guy. And so really kind of what stood out to me here is evil queen. That should have been a big clue to you that she is the antagonist of the story. What about this one? Gru in Despicable Me starts off trying to steal the moon, but ends up becoming a loving father. What sort of character is Gru? Is he the protagonist or is he the antagonist? The correct answer here was A. He is the protagonist. He is the one that we are rooting for in the story. He is the quote-unquote good guy. He's who the story is mostly about. Now, I included this question specifically because, as I said when we were going over the protagonist notes, just because they're the protagonist does not mean that they always make the best decisions. So we said here in our example that Gru starts off trying to steal the moon. That is not a very hero kind of thing to do. But as the story progresses, he changes and he becomes the person who we root for, and he becomes the good guy. So he is the protagonist in that story. Now we're going to talk about round characters and flat characters. Round characters are the characters in the story whose personality, background, motives, and other features are fully explained by the author. In other words, a round character is a character who we know what their motivations are, and we see multiple parts of their personality. We see the good, we see the bad, and we see the ugly. They're round. We have a really good understanding of that character's motivations and what drives them throughout the story. The example is Katniss Everdeen, if you've ever read or seen The Hunger Games. She's a very complicated character. If you think back to the story, at first she doesn't really want to be part of the Hunger Games, but she's forced to because she loves her sister. And then throughout the story, she becomes like this symbol and this rebellion force that tries to overthrow the government in her story. So there's lots of different qualities to her that we learn about as we progress through the story. So that makes her a round character. Some other examples of round characters are Flynn and Rapunzel from the movie Tangled. Again, we see multiple aspects to their personalities. We understand what motivates them throughout the story. For example, with Rapunzel, she is very conflicted in the story because she knows she's supposed to stay in her tower, but she's always longed for more. And we really see her kind of like battle that internal conflict. And so that gives us a really good understanding of her personality. It gives us lots of different features to think about with her. And so she and Flynn both are round characters. The opposite of round characters are our flat characters. Flat characters are the characters in a story who do not undergo any change or growth in the story. A character is just defined by one or two traits. The example is Patrick Star from SpongeBob. He's not a super complex character. He's pretty easy to understand. He really doesn't have many character traits that we see throughout all the different episodes of SpongeBob. He's kind of just there for some comedic relief. So he is considered a flat character. Very basic, just one or two traits that go along with his personality. I guess this would be a great time to remind you that there is lots of things highlighted in yellow, and you should be adding those to your notebook. Pause the video if you need to get all of that copied down. Some other examples of flat characters, we have the turtles from Finding Nemo. Fantastic characters, love them, they're so funny, but they are flat characters. There's really not a whole lot to their personality. They're really just there to kind of move the story along. And then the minions from Despicable Me, same situation. They are flat characters. They don't have much to their personality. All right, we've got a couple more practice questions to go over here. Our first one says, Forky in Toy Story 4 mostly repeats, "I'm trash," and is confused by the world. He's mostly used for humor and doesn't develop much. What kind of character is Forky? Is he a round character or a flat character? Hopefully you identified option B. Forky is a flat character. This last sentence is really what helps that be known. It says he's mostly used for humor and he doesn't develop much. So there's really not much to his personality. If his only lines are, "I'm trash," that's a big clue there as well. Buzz Lightyear goes from thinking he's a real space ranger to realizing he's a toy. Through this journey, he shows pride, confusion, sadness, and growth. What kind of character is Buzz? Is he a round character or a flat character? Hopefully you identified that Buzz is a round character. Again, the second sentence is what helps show us that. It says, through this journey, he shows pride, confusion, sadness, and growth. Growth is a big key word there. Remember, round characters have lots of personality traits, and there's lots of different things that motivate and push them in the story. And so for him to show growth is a big indication that he is a round character because he's done some changing and some growing throughout the story. All right, I am going to have to break this up into 2 videos like we did last week with our notes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and then I'm going to head over, you guys can head over to Google Classroom to watch part 2 of your notes from today.